What happens when a godlike Pokemon falls off? A Pokemon that resides in the highest tier, Uber, losing its prestigious status and now existing among the mortals in the normal tiers. When this happens, it can have a huge impact. Uber is the highest tier in competitive singles, where the best Pokemon in the game face off. The most powerful box legendaries reside here, and sometimes so do non-legendaries, if they're powerful enough to match that godlike status. But just because you're ranked in the Uber tier once doesn't mean you'll stay there forever. Let's take a look at some examples of Pokemon that were humbled and demoted from their godhood. The first and most notable example is Mew, the original elusive legendary Pokemon from the first game, later rebranded to be a mythical Pokemon. Mew in the lore and in the games was godlike. In the first Pokemon game, only it and Mewtwo are ranked Ubers, a significant cut above everything else available in the game. Mew is defined by its 100 base stats across the board, making it very flexible, allowing it to fill almost any role. It is also defined by its incredible access to every single TM move in the game, giving it one of the most diverse move pools in Pokemon history. And Mew had options that even its superior Mewtwo did not have, that set it apart in these earlier games, like the combination of Swords Dance and Explosion. In the first 4 Pokemon games, Mew was firmly ranked in the Uber tier, and to think of it falling from Uber tier was completely insane. How could this ever fall from Uber tier? It's Mew. Mew can do anything. Except all the things it can't do, because it's stupid. In Gen 5, Mew fell down, not 1 tier, but 2 tiers. From Ubers down to UU. A terrible, terrible fall from grace for what was once a respectable Pokemon among the gods. What in the world happened here? Well, one of Mew's most important options, Explosion, was significantly nerfed in Gen 5. And that was a big hit to Mew. Explosion used to have the effect of halving the enemy Pokemon's defense when used, effectively doubling its power. But they went ahead and cut that. It was a bit much, to be honest, a fair thing to nerf. But this was bad news for Mew, as this was one of its most powerful options. Back in Gen 3, the Swords Dance Explosion combo could threaten to one-hit KO even defensive steel types like Skarmory and Thorotris. And the threat of this option, as well as all the other options Mew can have, like special attacks and other utility and coverage, made it that much scarier. The threat of this powerful explosion was a big deal. In Gen 4, the combination of Stealth Rock, Taunt, and Explosion was Mew's big claim to fame, and this in conjunction with all its other set variety would make it very difficult to play around. In Gen 5, however, with this Explosion option no longer having the impact it has, Mew has suffered greatly. In the Gen 5 OU metagame, Mew's versatility no longer feels overwhelmingly powerful to the point where it can't be answered. In fact, in OU, Mew is kind of struggling against other similar Pokemon. If you want an offensive Psychic type, Alakazam or Latios are going to be much better. A defensive Psychic type, Reuniclus, is going to be a lot better. And even though Alakazam and Reuniclus lack some options like Will-O-Wisp and all the coverage of TMs and Stealth Rock, they do have the ability Magic Guard, which is a significantly better ability than Mew's ability Synchronize, which has the weak effect of simply mirroring a status ailment to the enemy. In Gen 5, there was some real power creep, especially with regard to abilities, and this made Mew feel a bit outdated. As with all these new Pokemon abusing their exciting, powerful new abilities, Mew doesn't have something good like a Regenerator or Magic Guard. It's stuck with lame old Synchronize, which is pretty low impact. Mew can still sometimes be used in OU, as it can fill gaps with its vast move pool, and it does have the great unique option of Will-O-Wisp, which is a fantastic move, but it has been downgraded from an Uber's level earth-shattering threat to now a niche defensive guy in OU completely outclassed, most of the time by other Psychic types, which is quite a fall from grace, wouldn't you say? Mew did become a good Pokemon in OU when it gained the new option of buffed Defog, which removed hazards, because Mew had that and other utility, making it a great roll compression Pokemon, but the sheer power of Mew in earlier gens feels like a distant memory. And in Gen 9, for some reason, they nerfed Mew and got rid of its option of Soft Boiled, which kind of killed it permanently. Without healing, Mew can't really function in the same way. I enjoy Mew, and I hope that they give it a buff in a new game, because I think that it being stuck with Synchronize for all these years is a huge shame. It's just one of those Pokemon that didn't get a good new ability in Gen 5, and that has a big impact on your viability, unfortunately. The Gen 5 hidden abilities had huge ramifications for years to come, and Mew didn't get one. Up next is Celebi. When Celebi debuted in Gen 2, it was ranked in Uber, and it had a mystical aura associated with it, a magical fairy creature from the forest, inspiring awe and wonder in gamers. How could this be a bad Pokemon? It was an excellent Pokemon, in fact. It may look a little bit like an onion, and onions are not a very powerful vegetable, but that would not affect Celebi's power level in the game, at least not yet. When Celebi debuted, it was a great Pokemon in Gen 2 Uber. Very similar to Mew, in fact, with a psychic grass typing and the same 100 base stats across the board. Celebi set itself apart from Mew with access to one crucial move that Mew did not get, Leech Seed, which is one of the best moves in the game at this time. Leech Seed is excellent, a damage over time effect that saps the enemy's HP and heals you based on a percentage of their HP. I think if this was legal in Gen 2 OU, it would be a bit much. Think about it, Celebi would be an excellent Pokemon against just about everything. Snorlax, Zapdos, Raikou. And with such a free click as Leech Seed, with little in the game that could switch in against it, Celebi would overwhelm the format. And in Ubers, it's a formidable Pokemon for this reason, for the incredible value Leech Seed provides. Now, as I'm describing this, I am realizing that this sounds a bit quaint in hindsight, doesn't it? The peak of power in Gen 2 is just having the move Leech Seed, apparently, and other good utility. Is that it? That makes you a godlike threat? Well, yes, back in Gen 2 that was the case, but Celebi's godlike status would be very short-lived. And in the very next generation, Gen 3, it would fall and be allowed to use in the OU tier. What happened in just one generation that made Celebi so much worse? Well, a lot happened. A lot happened here. Many mechanical changes were put in place in Gen 3. The EV system, abilities, many more held items, many things occurred. And the Ubers metagame had many new faces introduced to it, most notably Kyogre and Groudon, the new weather-setting legendaries that would define the metagame. Celebi may seem like a good option against these. I mean, it's a grass type, it resists water and ground, but both Kyogre and Groudon possess coverage to hit Celebi very well. Kyogre has Ice Beam, Groudon has fire coverage in various forms. The new edition of Rayquaza was hostile to Celebi with its flying damage and fire damage and many options that hit Celebi for massive damage. Latios is good against Celebi also, and kind of outclasses it as a bulky psychic type. As Celebi in Ubers was already falling off majorly. It was no longer anywhere close to viable in Ubers. I don't even think you see Celebi in Gen 3 Ubers as a niche option. Maybe you do sometimes, but even then you would much rather Jirachi and of course Mew, who is still very good. What Celebi has learned here is that having access to explosives is a huge advantage. Mew being able to explode keeps it in the conversation for much longer. Celebi cannot explode. Celebi really should have thought about all this, but Celebi did not. Because Celebi is a mere onion, a mere vegetable, not capable of higher level thoughts like, understanding how good explosions are in combat. So now Celebi is a great Pokemon in Gen 3 OU, but it's far from oppressive or overpowered or anything, with so much in the game to defeat it, with permanent sand and spikes, preventing it from being a invincible defensive threat. The rise of bug coverage, which also hits common contemporaries like Claydol Starmie. More offensive flying types in the metagame like Aerodactyl, Salamence, and Gyarados to threaten Celebi. More fire types in the metagame like Moltres and Charizard. And of course Dugtrio, who can trap and eliminate Celebi with Hidden Power Bug too. What was once, an oppressive presence in Gen 2 OU, if it were to be allowed there, is now a completely reasonable presence in Gen 3 OU. And Celebi would only get worse and worse as time went on. That times 4 bug weakness would really catch up to it with the release of U-Turn to the game, which quickly became one of the most common moves. Buffed Knockoff was a disaster for Celebi, and Celebi just generally lagged behind the competition with its typing getting worse and its ability Natural Cure also being less valuable than it was back in the day. Its move pool is shallow compared to other options. And in later games, even OU viability is completely out of the question for what was once an Ubers ranked Pokemon. It does feel a bit wrong for this mystical being that once inspired such awe and wonder to be a low-tier Pokemon and competitive, but it's the truth, and It is rather regrettable. Up next is a Gen 4 mythical Pokemon, Manaphy, and you're noticing a pattern here, aren't you? This is also a Pokemon with 100 base stats across the board, but Manaphy, I would say, is considerably more powerful than both Mew and Celebi for a few reasons. Manaphy possesses a mono water typing, which is the best typing of all of them. Water to this day is a great typing, and many water types thrive competitively. So that's already boding well for Manaphy. Although Manaphy is a bit more limited in its move pool than Mew or Celebi, with mostly special attacking options, it is so excellent at its job as a special attacker that doesn't really matter. Manaphy has the ability Hydration, which will cure your status at the end of each turn if Rain is active. This is an excellent ability that, of course, in Gen 4 Ubers, has obvious application alongside Kyogre. Kyogre sets permanent rain on the field with Drizzle. Manaphy gains complete status immunity effectively if paired with Kyogre. And crucially, it can use the move Rest to fully heal itself and then immediately cure the sleep at the end of the turn, granting a fantastic full heal. A concept scarcely imaginable. And you may think that Manaphy would be much more reasonable in OU without permanent rain, but even with Damp Rock Rain Dance for support, or even just running Rain Dance itself, this is just an incredibly powerful mechanic, especially for the time. Manaphy's very solid stat distribution, as well as the simple Surf Ice Beam coverage combo, and two great options for boosts with Tail Glow, which raises special attack by 2, same as Nasty Plot in Gen 4, and Calm Mind, which raises special attack and special defense. Manaphy was difficult to defeat, even for special walls. Being status immune and being able to overwhelm them with the Rain Dance and Surf damage, it was a bit much. So in Gen 4, when it debuted, Manaphy was an Ubers level threat, and a very solid Pokemon in Gen 4 Ubers on Rain teams. And believe it or not, in the next game, Manaphy got even better. In Generation 5, they buffed the move Tail Glow to be superior to Nasty Plot instead of equivalent. Now Tail Glow grants +3 special attack, which is a significant buff that turned it into one of the best boosting moves in the game. And this made Manaphy more noteworthy as a explosive offensive threat. More formidable in Ubers, and, if it wasn't already out of the question to allow it in OU, not only does it have this buffed Tail Glow enhancing its power, it also has Politoed as a potential ally, who just has Drizzle to create a permanent rain in OU now. Temporary rain was bad enough, now this guy can abuse permanent rain? No way. In Gen 5, Manaphy was even stronger. It wasn't until Gen 6 that Manaphy would finally fall from its godlike status, and the reason is quite simple for this. Permanent weather was removed from the game completely. Not only from OU but from Ubers, as all weather setting abilities, even legendary ones, no longer set permanent weather. Without permanent weather, Manaphy becomes way worse. Its hydration is less of a selling point. Now, you may think that Manaphy still could be good in Ubers with its powerful Tail Glow, but then you'd remember the truth of the fact that a Primal Groudon was introduced in this format, a Pokemon completely immune to the water type and who is on every single team and sets the desolate land on the field. Manaphy's career in Ubers was over. It was a significant power spike. Xerneas and the Primals and Megas and stuff, Manaphy was left far behind, and its main claim to fame was the weather synergy, which no longer exists at all. But it wasn't all bad for Manaphy. It maintained good spirits and had a respectable career in OU for years to come, as Tail Glow is just a damn good move that not a lot of things get. It's good on Sticky Web teams, because Sticky Web lowers speed and means its base 100 speed is more workable versus faster Pokemon. And the option of self-creating rain to have you be immune to status is another powerful option that Manaphy has at its disposal if it wants. I really enjoyed using Manaphy in Gen 7 OU, I remember, because it was one of the few special attackers that could break through Blissey with Tail Glow and Rain Dance, because you're immune to status if you Rain Dance, and also the power increase on water with max special attack can 2-hit Blissey or Chansey. I quite enjoyed that one. Manaphy is lower tier at the moment in Gen 9, but it did have some time in OU back when Alolan Ninetales setup sweeper teams were all the rage. And it has the new option of Take Heart, which is basically Calm Mind a bit better. Curing status as well as boosting your special attack and special defense. I don't think Manaphy's career is over, and I still think it has a lot of great traits to show for its existence. Unlike Mew and Celebi, who are going to need more buffs to return back to the forefront, I think Manaphy is fundamentally not too bad, and I think it still sees some use occasionally. Up next is Garchomp. Even though Garchomp is a non-legendary Pokemon, when it came out you could have fooled me. Gen 4 Garchomp was way ahead of the curve, with unbelievable power for its time. For very clear reasons, I think. Garchomp's typing and stats and move pool were absolutely outstanding. It has very well balanced stats, and above average 102 base speed as well. And Dragon Ground typing is amazing. What resists Dragon? Steel. What hits Steel? Ground. It's complementary. Garchomp is fast, bulky, threatening, it's got it all. Dragon types in general were very powerful back in Gen 4 with the new option of Outrage, buffed Outrage hitting the scene, with its incredible power. Draco Meteor as well for mixed Dragon Stab on the special side, which itself has enormous base power. Dragon typing was a huge boon, as Dragon was probably the best offensive typing in the game at this point. Garchomp was incredibly overwhelming for the Gen 4 metagame just on these advantages alone, but then its ability Sand Veil made it even more frustrating. In the sand, this has base evasion, so even if you are in a position where you're about to beat Garchomp, you could just miss Ice Beam, which isn't even supposed to miss. You could miss Ice Beam, Garchomp gets to get off scot-free and then kill you with a huge Outrage. It's simply unfair. The rich get richer. So Garchomp banned in Gen 4. And even in Ubers, this thing was common, as it hit Dialga, it outran many popular legendaries, and had stats that weren't even too far off, many of them. A truly godlike Pokemon on release. But that godhood wouldn't last that long. It was only the single generation of Uber's status. In the next gen, Gen 5, Garchomp was demoted to mortal status, and allowed to be used in OU. Even though many of its advantages are still very much present, it did feel more reasonable in this environment. The power level in general had increased, and contemporaries in OU were not paling in comparison, they were matching Garchomp. This is a metagame after all where Keldeo exists, Latios is allowed, Thundurus Therian is in the game. There are powerful dragon types everywhere you look. Garchomp is just one of them. More things could defensively answer Garchomp here. Physical sets were answered very well by Ferrothorn. Landorus Therian is a general good check to Garchomp, and even a competitor to Garchomp in the bulky ground category. When Garchomp came out in Gen 4, it was a real, you're not ready for this yet, but your kids are gonna love it type situation. It was a bit much for Gen 4, but in Gen 5 it was a more palatable Pokemon. Very good, but not overwhelming, as everything else began to increase to match Garchomp's power level. From Gen 6 onwards, Garchomp would be even more manageable as the Fairy type was introduced. A blanket nerf to all Dragon types, as Fairy is immune to Dragon, ending the Dragon's reign of terror. Many of these Pokemon are ashamed to be demoted from Godhood. I think Garchomp, though, is grateful to even have touched Godhood for a brief moment. And Garchomp has been very vocal to its contemporaries about this, telling them to maybe appreciate what they have rather than long for what they don't. I mean, Ubers is a hostile environment. It's a lot of pressure up there. They've got Giratina and stuff up there. You don't want to be amongst Giratina. Garchomp feels much more at home alongside his friendly rival Ferrothorn. That's more his speed. Garchomp does not want to contend with Necrozma Duskmane Ultra or guys like that. Garchomp doesn't care for that. Garchomp doesn't like that. Now, up next is a Pokemon that does not have the humble and admirable attitude of Garchomp, but one that got a little bit egotistical with its rise to Uber's status. Blaziken is a Pokemon that was not born amongst the gods, but was promoted to godhood in Generation 5 when it received the huge buff of the new ability Speed Boost. Before this, Blaziken was an average, if not underwhelming, mixed attacker, but with access to Speed Boost, it now became genuinely more powerful than most legendary Pokemon. Speed Boost allowed Blaziken to swiftly and very safely outrun the entire game by just clicking Protect to passively boost its speed. Speed Boost just grants +1 speed at the end of every turn. It's a ridiculous ability. It's an insane ability. And Blaziken with its fire fighting typing and great offensive stats, is an incredible force to be reckoned with. This buff was enough to give Blaziken Uber's status in Generation 5, 6, and 7. In Gen 6 and 7, Blaziken even received a Mega Form with the same ability, but it's arguably better to run base form Blaziken, because it doesn't take a Mega slot from your team, and it's still powerful to be able to run a held item, which Mega Blaziken cannot. Mega Blaziken got a bit comfortable among its legendary contemporaries, thinking that he was part of the team, but he was not. Because in Gen 8, everything came crumbling down. The Empire began to fall. In Gen 8, Blaziken, for the first time in years, fell down from Ubers to OU. And it isn't even ranked OU by usage. Any longer in Gen 8, it's a UUBL Pokemon. What the hell happened here? Blaziken would seem to have all the same advantages on the surface, wouldn't it? Well, to be honest, Ubers had been an adversarial environment for Blaziken for a while, even though it's ranked Uber in Gen 6 and 7. It was more of a niche pick there, as the powerful Primal Groudon was actually a pretty effective and very common check to it. And I think other physical boost sweepers like Zygarde and Mega Salamence were preferred for their greater consistency. Blaziken tended to struggle to find setup opportunities and be a bit too frail and not able to hit important one-hit KO ranges. Still too overwhelming for OU at the time, but in Ubers, its power was dwindling. That was especially true when Gen 8 came around, as Eternatus was added to the game. A terrible, terrible new matchup for Blaziken, with its resistance to both fighting and fire. In OU, Blaziken would like to use the option of Hidden Power Ice for a few reasons, to hit important targets like Landorus Therian and Garchomp, who would otherwise give it problems. But in Gen 8, they got rid of the move Hidden Power. Now Blaziken doesn't have that crucial special coverage for those matchups, and therefore it is struggling much more against those problem Pokemon. Blaziken is also suffering from general metagame trends in the Gen 8 OU world. Slowbro became an incredibly common Pokemon in Gen 8, with its fantastic physical bulk, access to Regenerator for reliable healing, the new option of heavy-duty boots, which it could use to ignore hazards, giving it even more longevity, and the new option of Teleport on it, allowing it to pivot out and maintain momentum. So Slowbro became really common, and Slowbro destroys Blaziken with its fire and fighting resistances, and high defense. Blaziken was no longer tearing through OU with ease in a single setup turn. It would set up and then just get beaten easily by common Pokemon. Blaziken can still be used in Gen 8 OU. It is still a viable choice and a good win condition to build towards, but it's far from the ridiculously overwhelming godlike win in a single turn Pokemon it used to be back in the day. In Gen 9, Blaziken isn't faring much better, frankly. It remains UUBL, and I'll admit that I thought it would be quite good, actually, in Gen 9 with the new Terra mechanic, but Blaziken suffers from terrible matchups into common Pokemon yet again, especially Great Tusk. Probably the worst matchup imaginable for Blaziken. Blaziken had a taste of godhood and never wanted to let go, forgetting its humble beginnings as a niche OU Pokemon. Back in Gen 3, Blaziken was UUBL. It was sometimes used as a mixed attacker. Now in Gen 9, Blaziken is UUBL, once again with a niche usage here and there, returning back to its original state. Things certainly come full circle for this chicken creature who once touched the heavens. Up next is Greninja. Many may not remember, but when Greninja first released in Gen 6, this fella was ranked in Uber. Greninja was insane when it first came out. Greninja has the incredible ability Protean, one of the best abilities ever conceived. Every time Greninja uses a move, it will change its type to match the type of that move. This ability is so good for so many reasons. The main one is that this effectively gives you a stab boost on every single move, so pretty much just 1.5x damage on all attacks. Use Ice Beam, you become an Ice type, and gain Ice Stab temporarily. Same with any move that you click. It is absolutely incredible. Protean also has excellent defensive value, because when you become a new type, you gain all the defensive traits of that type. So for example, if you're using Hidden Power Fire, which is great coverage, you will now become a Fire type. In your base typing you are weak, to grass, but now you resist grass because you're a fire type. You're getting coverage and defensive value in one. It's kind of like a weird version of terrestrialization before that even existed. Greninja, in its debut game of Gen 6, was a bit overwhelming for the time. This ability was just so fantastic in all regards. A blanket offensive buff to all coverage moves and the ability to dodge justice in many avenues, as even Ferrothorn couldn't beat you. Ferrothorn would try to hit you with Power Whip and you would hit them with the HP Fire, becoming Fire type yourself and resisting Grass. Not to mention Greninja is very fast. It has a base 122 speed, outrunning most things in the game. And its special attack is respectable too, considering how good the ability is. This ability even let Greninja be a decent mixed attacker with options like Gunk Shot for physical coverage. Even though its attack is a little bit less than its special attack, with the Protean stab boost it doesn't matter too much, does it? So what led to Greninja's fall in the very next generation? How could such a fundamentally powerful idea be allowed in OU in Gen 7? Why did Greninja fall from that Uber's status, that coveted Uber's status? Well, I believe it was another case of the power level around it rising considerably. It's a bit of a Garchomp moment again. Gen 7 was a pretty significant power increase, and Greninja had many new adversaries that could actually handle it now. One of the big ones was Tapu Koko. Tapu Koko cannot switch in against Greninja, but it does outrun and threaten Greninja, meaning Greninja is no longer the fastest thing on the planet and has this common Pokemon it has to contend with. Scarf Greninja could outrun Tapu Koko, but that's obviously more of a commitment, a restrictive item. Greninja also gained a new ability in Gen 7, the new ability Battle Bond, which was largely better than Protean. After KOing a Pokemon, Greninja would become Ash Greninja and gain way more stats, plus get a new buffed Water Shuriken. So Battle Bond Greninja ended up being the more popular version of Greninja, and therefore Protean Greninja, with all of its different coverage and the changing of types, wasn't as popular or common anymore. So the main Greninja you have to check is the one that's just using its stab options of Water and Dark. It's not using the Protean mechanic. Therefore, a great check to that Greninja was Magiana, a new option in Gen 7. With an Assault Vest, Magiana is excellent against Ash Greninja, stomaching its Water Stab well enough and resisting its Dark Stab and Ice coverage, as well as threatening it with very super effective damage. And even if Protean Greninja was used, it had more checks in the game too defensively, like Toxapex, new Pokemon Toxapex, who has incredible bulk on both the physical and special defense side, has Regenerator for free and safe healing, and also isn't frightened of any coverage Greninja can really get. The most frightening thing for Toxapex to deal with against Greninja is Ground DMZ with Dig. That's obviously a huge commitment to spend your Z move just to hit Toxapex. So Toxapex was a terrible adversary for Greninja and a popular new Pokemon in the game. Gen 7 felt like a metagame that was more about brute force of stab moves than coverage like Protean offered. So Greninja with Protean was feeling a little bit more manageable here. It still had its value, of course, but with the metagame speeding up considerably, and so many new Pokemon contending with Greninja as an offensive threat, all of the Ultra Beasts and the Tapus, Protean Greninja was no longer the strongest thing around. Battle Bond Greninja kind of replaced it and fit better in the metagame with its brute force style of just Rain, Ash Greninja, Click and Surf and Water Shuriken for the most possible raw damage output. That was better. And I mean, Ash Greninja is so strong that you almost might think this deserves Uber status. But Gen 7 was a crazy time where this was just the norm. A guy this powerful was just a regular Tuesday. So in Gen 7, Greninja was no longer a god-like Pokemon. In Gen 8, Greninja didn't exist. They erased him from existence temporarily. In Gen 9, Greninja returned, and things had changed considerably in Gen 9. With Dexit occurring, no more Z-moves or Megas or whatever, so many Pokemon being cut, and most notably of all for Greninja, the nerfing of Protean. The nerfing of Greninja's whole thing. Protean no longer allows you to just change your type multiple times while you're in. The type change now only occurs once per switch in. So if you use Gunk Shot, you will become a poison type, but then if you use Surf, you will remain a poison type. You change type once, you don't change type every single time you click a move. You have to switch out and back in to reactivate the Protean effect. And this is significantly worse, of course, than Protean used to be. I believe they did this to shine more light on the Terra mechanic, which is a more universal way to change a Pokemon's type that any Pokemon can use. And Protean would make Terra seem lame by comparison if it still worked as it used to, probably. So, sort of makes sense when Terra is the new gimmick to nerf Protean. But it was a big hit for Greninja. It was a massive hit. Battle Bond doesn't work the same either. Battle Bond has changed. Instead of transforming into Ash Greninja like before, now you just receive a boost. After KOing a Pokemon, you get a boost to attack, special attack, and speed. Once per battle. So you literally only get this boost a single time after a KO. So if you're forced out and back in, you're just normal Greninja again without a boost. And you can't reactivate it on another KO. This is way worse than Ash Greninja, which is a huge stat increase and buff to Water Shuriken that maintains for the rest of the game. Battle Bond, in its old state, was far better. Now, I'm thankful that Ash Greninja is no longer here. That guy was crazy, but still a big nerf. A really big nerf. Without all these things that have made Greninja powerful in the first place, it has fallen off a cliff. It is now ranked in UU. But of course, in the new Pokemon Legends ZA game, it has been revealed that a Mega Greninja is going to come into existence, and this will perhaps change everything. Depending on what Mega Greninja ends up doing, maybe Greninja will return back to the forefront of competitive like it used to in its heyday. With Pokemon Champions coming out too, I'm sure that the Megas from Legends ZA will be available in Pokemon Champions. And this may have an impact on a new metagame that forms. So it's not all over for Greninja. Being such a popular Pokemon, of course, would receive some sort of buff and new title. Will Mega Greninja breathe life back into this famous frog? We'll have to see. A very recent example of a Pokemon falling from its godhood is the example of Darkrai in Gen 9, a very controversial one, for many reasons. There's much controversy to be had here. Darkrai, of course, released in Gen 4, where it was immediately Uber's status upon release. Obviously, with its high speed, high special attack, and the accurate Dark Void for 80 accuracy sleep, the Pokemon was insane. The best sleep setter in the entire game, and with the ability Bad Dreams on top to chip and damage the enemy while they're asleep, it was an incredible combination. This aged pretty well too, with Sleep on a fast Dark type special attacker just being a strong concept in multiple games to follow. The only reason Darkrai ever fell off in Ubers was because of the nerf to Dark Void. Dark Void was nerfed in Gen 7, from its 80 accuracy down to 55 accuracy, making it significantly more dangerous to use. 80 accuracy is above average for a sleep-inflicting move. 55 is basically a coin flip. To risk your life on a coin flip is very unreliable in competitive Pokemon. You shouldn't do that. So Darkrai usage plummeted overnight. The reason for this nerf was actually not even because of Darkrai. It was because of Smeargle using the move Dark Void in official VGC events to hit both opponents in doubles. Dark Void is able to hit both enemies and put them to sleep in doubles, which is extraordinarily powerful, and was abused by Smeargle, because Darkrai wasn't even allowed in VGC events. They nerfed it for that reason, and they also prevented Smeargle from being able to learn it, so they double nerfed it. Perhaps they're future-proofing the idea also of Darkrai being allowed in VGC and preventing that from being too powerful. But regardless, this nerf was enormous for Darkrai, and plummeted its career instantaneously. It now had to use Hypnosis for its most accurate sleep-inflicting move, which was still only 60. Far from reliable. So in Gen 9 they decided to test Darkrai in OU. Since it was so much worse now, why not try it out in OU, see if it's okay now. And surprisingly, it was okay. There were more defensive answers to it now in the high-power Gen 9 environment. Things could actually respond to it, and in the eyes of many, it wasn't even the best special attacker in the game compared to other options like Dragapult, who are faster and have better utility options and pivoting and such. Iron Valiant as well was a big competitor. So Darkrai remains OU to this day. But there was a problem. Even with Hypnosis being so inaccurate, a Pokemon this fast being able to sleep the enemy and then damage them while they're asleep was still powerful. And if it did land, your chances of victory all of a sudden plummeted to near zero. A Pokemon that could win a game off of a near coin flip proved pretty unhealthy. Despite the risk associated with clicking Hypnosis, the power of Hypnosis on something this fast was hard to ignore. This eventually led to an entire banning of the sleep mechanic in Gen 9, and I do not want to reopen this can of worms. I've discussed it at length in many videos. But that was a very controversial choice that many disagree with how they handle it, including me. We won't get into all that again. But now Darkrai exists without even being able to use Hypnosis in Gen 9 OU, and it is considered a palatable offensive Pokemon in the format. It is very powerful, it has a high special attack and high speed, and great coverage options, but things like Primarina and Clodsire and Tinglu can answer it well enough. At least that's what Smogon thought. To be honest, a lot of people think Darkrai should never have been unbanned. This was a mistake. A lot of people want Darkrai rebanned. This is probably the most dubious example of such a thing on this list because not everyone necessarily agrees with Darkrai being allowed in OU. It is a contentious one. But objectively speaking, the tier did shift. Darkrai was demoted. Whether that was justified or not, I suppose, is up to you, the viewer, to decide. And another recent example of a Pokemon being demoted from its godhood is Zamazenta, the Gen 8 cover legendary of Pokemon Shield. This is rather an interesting case as well, because Zamazenta was infamous when it came out for being a terrible box legendary that just didn't really work in concept. It is a weird defensive fighting type that gets a defense boost when it switches in, but its stats are sort of geared to an offensive role. It's trying to do both and not really succeeding at either one. It's fast with great attack and it gets this defense boost, but its move pool is really limited. It doesn't have any noteworthy utility. It's not walling anything particularly well in Ubers. And offensively, there are just way better Pokemon. Way better legendaries. So Zamazenta was kind of a Pokemon that didn't really work fundamentally. And in Gen 9, much like the Darkrai situation, they see this legendary that is failing to exist in its designated tier, and they ask themselves, what if we allow him in OU for a bit? What if we try him out? Let's see how this goes. Maybe Zamazenta will be manageable. It does have legendary level stats, it has incredible stats, it has a massive speed stat, but its stats were nerfed in Gen 9, and its ability Dauntless Shield was also nerfed. This is no longer a permanent defense boost, it is a temporary once per battle defense boost on switching. Zamazenta also received the new option of Body Press, which was a buff. Body Press being a fighting type attack that uses your defense instead of your attack in damage calculation. And this made Zamazenta a formidable Pokemon in the VGC format. But still, in singles, they thought maybe Zamazenta's manageable this time. And I think they found that it was. Zamazenta may be powerful, and it may have this great Iron Defense Body Press combo, and the great stats of a box legendary, but its offensive options are very limited. It is relying pretty heavily on just Body Press for its damage output, which is a fighting type attack. A type that is easily stopped by Ghost. Zamazenta has a Crunch for coverage, but since it's investing so heavily in defense for Body Press, Crunch will be a bit weaker than expected. You can use this as a good win condition if you set up for it, but it does have its limitations, and plenty of defensive walls can stop Zamazenta, like Dondozo and Landorus Therian and Corviknight. And the newly popular Weezing Galar is excellent against Zamazenta. Zamazenta has a lot of adversaries. It's not necessarily overwhelming. Its limitations are keeping it in check a little bit here. Zamazenta also served to help the metagame out against the sometimes overwhelming King Gambit. Zamazenta is an excellent switch-in against King Gambit, gaining defense as it comes onto the field, allowing it to stomach incoming hits and hit King Gambit with a super effective Body Press for lethal damage. Zamazenta's sort of helping the metagame in a way too. This one's contentious too. A lot of people don't like Zamazenta in OU. I like it though. I think it added this nice guy that could defend against all the powerful boost sweepers in a pinch. It was also proactive. I think the meta needed that. I also think that it is not so overwhelming that you can't answer it. So I feel like it was a good addition to the metagame that helped it rather than hindering it. That's my opinion. You're free to disagree. It is a Legendario, and it's a dog Legendario at that, adding to the controversy further. Perhaps this is a case where Zamazenta is more at home in OU than it would have been in Ubers, where it felt out of place and alone and isolated. Now, in OU it thrives, in a different weight class. Perhaps he's better off here. A stray dog finding a home, if you will. Now, are there any examples of Pokemon that may fall from godhood in the future? I think there are. Some have proposed that perhaps Solgaleo should be tested in OU. Solgaleo is the box legendary of Gen 7, Pokemon Sun, that has always been a weaker box legendary. For one, it is completely outclassed by Necrozma Duskmane, who has the same typing and more options and better stats and a better ability. Solgaleo feels like it was completely left behind by that addition. Its ability is Full Metal Body, which is a little bit underwhelming for a big legendary. It just acts the exact same as a Clear Body, granting stat stage drop immunity. That's not very exciting. It's Psychic Steel. The typing isn't even that good in modern times, to be honest, with vulnerability to Ghost and Dark. Some Psychic Steel types can function, like Iron Crown, but it's hardly an elite typing or anything. And I think its stats are also not that insane for a legendary either. They are very good, of course, but I feel like in Gen 9 OU there are Pokemon with better stats than this, to be honest. Am I crazy for saying so? The HP and defense are very good, but then the typing balances that out, doesn't it? I think Solgaleo maybe could be tested and be reasonable in OU. It doesn't have any big boosting move that's crazy. Defensively, I don't even think it's gonna be more popular than like Tinglu or Gliscor, who have just better bulk all around, better typing. Would this even outclass Iron Crown? Would Iron Crown even be worried about the presence of Solgaleo? I don't know. Solgaleo has a Teleport, which is interesting. It has Knockoff. It has the Sunsteel Strike move, which is very good, but not so broken that it can't exist, I'd think. Maybe Solgaleo could be trialed in OU, perhaps. And some have also argued that Terrapagos should be tested in OU, with a caveat. Terrapagos was banned earlier in the generation for its powerful ability to terrestrialize and become the Stellar form. It has a unique form when it terrestrializes as the Stellar type that has an incredible base stat total that is more in line with box legendaries. Without being able to do this though, if it was banned from being able to Terra Stella, the Pokemon would probably be more reasonable. Its stat distribution is more modest. It does have the excellent ability Terra Shell, which means it resists all moves if at full HP. Amazing ability, but at the same time, it doesn't have recovery. Its stats are not overwhelmingly good. It would just be a decent Rapid Spinner that probably wouldn't even necessarily take the job of other Rapid Spinners like Great Tusk. The only real thing making this broken was its ability to Terra Stella, and without that, it would be perfectly reasonable. So, with a complex ban, banning this for terrestrializing Stella, it would be fine, and it might even add some health to the metagame with a new Rapid Spinner, a new hazard remover to speak of, which is something we might need in a world where it's so difficult to remove hazard lately. Something to ponder. It wouldn't necessarily be as clean as the Solgaleo one, because you would have to implement a complex ban, but the complex ban also makes sense, because that's the only thing that really makes it so powerful, and the metagame might appreciate it. Will this happen? We'll have to see. We'll have to see. And that concludes my list of Pokemon that fell from former godhood to the tiers where more humble Pokemon reside, and some of them could not accept this and fell into obscurity. Some embraced their new lives and remembered to appreciate the small things in life, remembered to be thankful for what they have, and those Pokemon with that great attitude have thrived for years to come in OU. And the moral of the story is that you should be smart and not stupid, and that's something we can all take to heart, I hope. Thank you for watching, folks. Which was your favorite Pokemon I talked about today? Let me know down below, and thank you for watching.